Welcome to the Self-Publishing School podcast. This is the podcast to listen to if you're an aspiring writer or an author who wants to be more successful. On this show, you'll learn how to write and launch a book successfully, all from the top authors and people just like you who are doing it at the highest level. I'm your host, Chandler Bolt, the founder of Self-Publishing School, the author of the book called Published, and the CEO of selfpublishing.com. For free training on how to publish a book that sells 10,000 copies, go to selfpublishing.com/free training. Hey, Chandler Bolt here, and joining me today is Gary Williams. So Gary is the author of the book, Choose Your Best Life. He's also an SPS coach, so coaching students here at Self-Publishing School. He's coached hundreds of students. We were trying to count close to 400, and he's completed over 4,000 coaching calls with students. Now, today we're going to be talking about MBTI, aka Myers-Briggs, as it relates to book writing and the publishing process and the lessons that he's learned from thousands of calls with SPS students. Now, maybe you're obsessed with personality types like I am, whether it's Myers-Briggs, the DISC, Enneagram, there's so many of them. And I feel like I end up learning a whole lot more about myself every time I take one of them. We use them in the hiring process. We use them in the management process. We use them with our students. And Gary is just a master, specifically when it comes to Myers-Briggs, so MBTI. He's done a lot of training sessions internally at SPS, which they're so good that there's a lot of times that I wish that it was like a resource for our students. And so here we are. That's what we're doing. We're talking about Myers-Briggs, and Gary's just unbelievably talented on this. I mean, every time he does these trainings with internal staff, everyone's faces are melted and just minds blown. I mean, myself included. And it's just, I always learn something about myself as it relates to my work, which is obviously probably part of the reason why you're listening to this or watching this today, but then also as it relates to my personal relationships. And that's what I think is so impactful and meaningful about this topic is 360 degrees of your life. So, and Gary's written a book, I mentioned this, Choose Your Best Life. If you want to check that out, it's about Myers-Briggs and especially applying this to times of transition, to career stuff, to big life decisions, all that good stuff. But that's what we're going to be talking about today. I am super excited for this. And I have a hunch that there's a lot of Myers-Briggs fans out there that are like, yes, finally someone talking about the thing that I care about within the context of another thing that I care about, which is writing and publishing books. So long intro, Gary, great to have you.
Yeah, super excited to be here and dig into some personality stuff. It's going to be fun.
Yeah, awesome. And well, let's dive in. So first things first, we were talking kind of beforehand. Do we assume that someone knows the Myers-Briggs? Do we assume that they don't? And we're going to go into the assumption that most people probably do, but some people probably don't. So we're going to start with that. And so can you give us an overview of like, what is the Myers-Briggs and just kind of an overview of the preferences, which is a keyword that I know you talk about a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. So big picture, we're talking about a personality tool to help people understand 4 different aspects of their own personality, of who they are as individual human beings. And so the Myers-Briggs system, MBTI stands for Myers-Briggs Type Indicator. It's looking at 4 different preferences, and there's a set of dichotomies. Right? So we're looking at 4 aspects of a person's personality, and then there's 2 options for each. So at a conceptual level, the idea of this tool is it's a type tool, right? We're trying to help people find a preference type. The reality is, the first one is a pair that a lot of people have heard of before, but it's used a little bit different in this tool specifically. It's extroversion and introversion, right? And the idea there is that every person has a general lean, a preference that they have one way versus the other that is going to be a little bit more comfortable for them, okay? The reality is, we all have aspects of both, of all the above in our personality, in our time together, but the goal is to identify what is that natural preference and to be able to uncover that so we can identify our unique personality type. So when we look at those 8 different options, right, there's the 4 dichotomies, which creates 8 different letters in this coding system. And if you do the math, that creates 16 different personality types. So there's a lot of free websites out there that will sometimes have like a table and a grid. And there's some goofy ones, right, with the different characters that you might be or how it might show up in different contexts. But there's also a lot of science and validity behind it. So you might not even know that it's called Myers-Briggs, but you might know, yeah, I've seen those 4 letters before. That's what we're talking about today.
Awesome. And so can you walk us through the kind of the 4 different options and an overview of the differences there?
Yeah, absolutely. So again, we're looking at 4 sets of pairs. So the first pair, okay, or dichotomy is what they like to call it in this system, is where you get and direct your energy, okay? So there's 2 options. There's extroversion and there's introversion, okay? And again, don't assume anything, right? I would encourage you, I'd challenge you to open your mind to what I'm about to say about those 2 types, because there's a lot of misconceptions in the world about those words, especially as it relates to this personality system, okay? So if you've heard those words, pause, dump it out of your mind, right? And listen in to what's key about it in this personality system. So it's where you direct and receive your energy. Extroverts have a preference, a tendency to direct their energy towards the outer world. For an extrovert, the real world is outside of themselves. It's the world of people, places, things outside of you, right? For an introvert, the opposite side of this dichotomy, the real world is the inner world, okay? And that is your inner thoughts, your feelings, your emotions, your memories, the things that have happened and are stored inside of you internally, right? So when we're looking at energy, everyone has access to both worlds, the inner and outer world, but the goal is, which one do you prefer? Which one is more comfortable? Which one would you identify as the real world? The outer world or the inner world? Okay, so that's the first pair. Questions, thoughts there?
Love that. I think I would just emphasize preference, because I think the common thing that I hear with people is like, oh, but I'm really outgoing. That means I must be an extrovert, or oh, I'm an extroverted introvert, and that it's where you get or where you focus or receive energy, and then also, and I just can't emphasize this enough from hearing you talk about it. It's like, this is one of my biggest takeaways is preference. Preference. This is not who you are. This is what you prefer. And so I think that's super important for the whole thing, but especially within the context of E versus I. And so if you have any final thoughts there, and then let's move into the next one.
Yeah, you mentioned something critical, right? The idea of outgoing, right? Or things like that. Something I hear all the time when it comes to E versus I, extrovert versus introvert, right? There are some very socially talented introverts in the world, right? I'm actually an introvert, but when I teach, when I present, people will look at me and they're like, there's no way you're an introvert, right? Because I turn it on. But it's a choice. It's me stepping out of my natural preference. So you could develop that skill and talent, but I still have a preference where the inner world is the real world, right? And so that's a key point. I'm glad you brought that up, Chandler. That's huge. Yeah. So let's look at the second pair, okay? The second pair or set of dichotomy is how you understand and receive information. So there's 2 different options here. There's sensing and intuition. So those who prefer sensing prefer to use their concrete senses, right? So what you see, touch, feel, hear, I don't remember the other senses, but the concrete senses, right, that we have as human beings, right, to understand the world around them. Typically, someone with a preference of sensing prefers to receive information that's black and white, that's concrete. It's very factual. The bottom line is clear. There's no ambiguity. We know exactly what we're getting because we can see it, we can experience it. It's been done before. Here it is, right? On the flip side of this dichotomy, we're looking at something called intuition. Now, like we said, there's different letters, and sometimes people get tripped up on this one. We use the letter N to represent it in the system, okay? Because we already used I for introvert, okay? So don't let that throw you off. N is for intuition. And the idea here is that those with a preference of intuition prefer the bigger picture. They prefer the theory. They like to kind of take in some information and draw their own conclusion based off of the things that they're receiving. Some describe it as almost more of a sixth sense, right? Or a comfort with things where they might need to draw their own conclusions from the information that they're receiving in the world around them in a way that might feel a little bit odd to others, right? Where these insights might be popping in your mind, or you're looking for patterns, whether it's internally or in the world. It's very different where you're drawing your own conclusions based off of the world around you compared to those concrete senses. Any thoughts there, Chandler?
That's great. And I'll try to share some analogies as we go that really help me understand it. And then you can poke holes in them, build on them, agree with them, disagree with them, etc. So one of the analogies I heard for S versus N, so sensing versus intuition, and a lot of people refer to intuition as like my gut, right? I got this gut feel. But one of the most common, or one of the analogies that really brought it home for me was this imagining a ladder. And there's a ladder that goes straight up into the sky. And the more of an S you are, the more of a like here and now, I need to have 2 feet on the ground and I will be holding on to the ladder. And so I'm here and now, and I'm sensing what's around me, all those things, right? And then the more of an N that you are, so intuition, the higher you lean into, or you have a preference towards intuition, the higher you are up on the ladder. So all the way up, like the highest end is like way up there above the clouds. Like, guys, oh my gosh, there's so much room for possibilities up here. I've got ideas. There's like big picture, like all these things. Is that true? Have you seen that play out? Anything that you would add or edit to that analogy?
Yeah, I think that's brilliant. That analogy actually stems from a concept of theory called the ladder of abstraction, right? And that's spot on, right? We start in a very concrete fashion, and that's the sensory, right? Versus that abstraction of concepts, of ideas, right? Someone who prefers sensing can still talk about ideas. They're just going to have a different threshold, and the way that they go about it is going to be very different, right? So if you were to look at a concept like love or peace or something like that, right? Someone that prefers sensing is going to describe that in a very different way than someone with intuition, right? Sensors might have a tendency to talk about their experience, right? Oh yeah, I've experienced love, right? I had this intimate relationship, or with my mother, or whoever it is, right? Like being able to describe it in a very concrete fashion, right? Whereas someone with intuition, the higher you climb up that ladder, like you're describing, might approach it in a way where it feels a little head in the sky, right? Where it's like, what are you actually saying, right? But it's the way that they see the world, right? And it's just different worldviews. Again, every single person has access to both of those. We're just trying to figure out which one is more comfortable for you. Which information are you more likely to trust, right? And what is going to be the way that you naturally gravitate towards communicating and receiving that information?
This is great. Awesome. We're building foundations, guys. And then we're going to dive into specific to book writing, book marketing, et cetera. So let's go next one, thinking versus feeling, or thinking and feeling. I guess I don't like the word versus because it makes it seem like they're at odds to each other. But thinking, feeling, what is this? And then what are those?
Yeah, great question. So at a conceptual level, right? Let's get intuition here for those that are listening in with a preference at intuition, right? We're talking about the concept of choice, right? We're talking about how you make decisions, right? So again, if we tie that into the last preference, right? If we're thinking about decisions, sensors are probably thinking, okay, when have I made decisions before, right? Whereas those with intuition are probably thinking, oh, choice, this concept, this theory, right? So again, you can start to almost get meta with this framework. But like you said, there's two opposite ends of this dichotomy. There's thinking and there's feeling. Common misconception that I want you to get out of your mind right now, okay? A lot of times people will say logic and emotion, right? The reality is I hate that because every human being has the ability to be logical, and every human being has the ability to be emotional. So it's not an either or. It's not the versus, like you said there. That was a beautiful distinction, Chandler, right? We all have access to both, but one of them is going to be the preferred way that we make choices or decisions in our world. So let's get into the reality, right? Those that prefer thinking, right? We're often looking at things from more of an objective analysis. A lot of times thinkers are going to be playing out different cause and effect relationships. Their decisions are going to be based on primarily logical point of view, but through that analysis, right? From a very objective perspective, okay? On the flip side, those with a preference of feeling are more likely to make decisions based off of values, either their own personal values or thinking about the values of other people and how it's going to impact others, right? It's centered more on the emotional experience, right, of either themselves or others. Now, an analogy here that could sometimes be helpful. Those that prefer thinking are often going to take a step back, right? They're going to take a step out of the situation and almost look at it and see as if it was variables, right? Like think of a scientist manipulating variables in a situation. It's that objective point of view. Whereas those with a preference of feeling are more likely to take a step in and experience what's happening in a way where they're alongside the people, the human beings, so they can be a part of the emotional experience or be in tune with the emotional experience of others. So again, we all have access to both, but one of them is going to be a more natural choice and a more natural way that you make decisions.
That's great. And I love the taking a step back versus taking a step in. I haven't heard that before. That's great. So final one, judging versus perceiving, which I feel like if there's one that people get the most confused, at least from my experience, it's this one. Can you kind of explain what it is in the individual ones?
Yes, absolutely. So again, I want you to get the preconceived notions of those words out of your mind. The reality is this language is a bit archaic. Okay. And so the word judging sometimes has some negative perceptions attached to it. Same thing even with perceiving. Get that out. And I want you to listen into what this actually means. Okay. It doesn't mean that judges judge people. Okay. That's not what we're saying at all. So listen in, right? We are at a conceptual level talking about structure and how you show up and deal with the outer world. Okay. So there's a lot of layers here, but I want to start again with kind of that foundational understanding. Those with a preference of judging, the J's of the world, tend to like things to be planned, organized, they're methodical, they're structured, right? They like to have things settled, right? I don't want to tell too much about the world on your worldview there, Chandler, but you have a phrase that is so J, and it's closing loops, right? Do you want to explain what that phrase means?
Yeah. And so I've got a video on this on my 7-Figure Principles YouTube channel and 7-Figure Principles podcast. So if you're interested, you can find more about that. But closing loops is essentially like you've got an open loop or this open task, and this is also a writing thing that we teach. Actually, is the opposite is the open loops, because open loops spark curiosity, and it's something that isn't yet closed. But specific to how we apply it internally in SPS is close the loop. So finish the task, schedule the thing, bring this full circle, and let's move on.
Mm-hmm. Listen to the language that you just heard from Chandler, right? Finish the task, close the loop. I hear this sense of completion, right? And then move on, right? That is like the most J language I could give to you, right? So if you're struggling with this dichotomy, listen to the language that you just heard from Chandler there, right? That is the preference of judging. On the flip side, right? We're looking at this idea of perceiving, used as the letter P in the Myers-Briggs system. And those with perceiving as a natural preference prefer to show up in the outer world with a bit of a more flexible or spontaneous approach to things, okay? They, on the flip side, like to leave their options open, right? So where you hear Chandler talking about close the loop, let's move on, let's get it done, let's get it complete, right? The perceivers are often driven by this idea where it's like, well, if I close the loop too fast, what if there was a better possibility? What if there was something else, right? So one common analogy that you'll sometimes hear with this is looking at an approach to a deadline or a task or a project. If you think about judging as a preference and you're working on a long-term goal, maybe like writing a book, right? Those that prefer judging are going to take a much more structured and methodical approach. You have another video, I think, out there called the 20-mile march, right? It's this idea of having this very methodical way of hitting a goal. They're going to have their energy spaced out in a way where, okay, every day I need to write 1,000 words. Every day I need to hit this mark to make sure that I'm on pace to hitting my goal. Very appropriate for those that have a natural preference of judging, okay? Perceiving on the flip side, they are likely to get a spurt of energy as the deadline is approaching. It doesn't mean that they're going to be late. It doesn't mean that they're going to miss the deadline. It means that there's this massive amount of energy that they receive that helps them get across the finish line as that deadline approaches. Again, it's not right or wrong. It's not, this is the way that you have to do it, or this is the way that, no, right? Every one of us has a natural preference. And the more that you have awareness of that, the more effective you can be as you're trying to do things that could be hard, right? Like writing a book. When you have this awareness, it could perhaps make it even easier for you.
That's great. And I was just jotting down notes. I think this relates to the author DNA quiz that we have, which if you're listening or watching, it's very, this we call a P is more the write when I'm inspired, right? And so it's I'm going to write when I'm inspired. I'm going to write in a flurry, and we have kind of the different author DNA. So I'm definitely recommend checking out that quiz on the site if you haven't already. So, and I'll share one more analogy. You can poke holes in it, agree with it, or build on it. And then we'll dive into actually how, through the lens of this, how does this play out in the experience that you've seen with students? So one analogy that I heard, which is just hilarious, and maybe it's more so hilarious from the perspective of a Jay, because I thought it was hilarious, but I think both parties find it hilarious, is Phil, who used to work with us at SPS. He's big into personality types as well. And he used the analogy of a koi pond. And he said, you know, Jays are like someone who has a koi pond, and it's like everything's neat, it's tidy, it's in place. You know, there's the fish there, there's a filtering system, all that. And P's will just randomly come and slap the koi pond, and then the Jays will be like, oh my gosh, and freaking out. And P's love it and Jays hate it. But in that process is kind of like the open, when things get interesting, I feel like P's thrive and Jays freak out. It's like, so both the big strength can be the big downfall. It's like when the messy parts of the book writing process, I think P's can really lean into it. And a J is like, oh my gosh, this is different than the outline that I had planned. This is not good. I'm panicking and I need to restructure this. But I just thought it was a really interesting analogy. And I think Phil was maybe an ENFP, and he knows that I'm an ESTJ. And it was just funny as like describing part of our working relationship. But any thoughts on that? Poke holes in it, build on it?
Yeah, absolutely. I think there's a lot of elements there. We'll have to come back and dig deeper in there because there's a ton of layers when you're looking at how that plays out. There's this concept underneath cognitive functions, right? So we have the preferences, and then there's this whole deeper layer to look at the wiring of your mind. And I hear very clearly one of the dominant functions in an ENFP type in particular, right? And so we'll have to dig in deeper at another conversation for that for sure. But there's definitely some elements attached to judging and perceiving there, right? With that idea of that openness, right? What would happen if, right? The experimentation, absolutely, versus the, whoa, no, let's make sure that this koi pond is exactly the way it needs to be. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. So let's transition. We got a good foundation. And obviously, you know, if you're watching this or listening to this, if you haven't already taken the Myers-Briggs test, I would encourage you to either pause this interview or take it right after this. There's a bunch of great sites. My personal favorite from a user experience perspective is 16personalities.com. I think they have just an amazingly done explanations, characters. I love looking at the percentages. As a T and a J, the percentages matter, even though I know they're inexact.
And an S.
yeah, and an S. Yeah, that's right. Yeah, all of them coming together there. But I would really encourage you to take the test, and a lot of this will make sense if you haven't already. But let's really dive in. I want to go kind of more abstract and then go into the specifics from a writing and marketing perspective. But just kind of more broadly first, how do you see, and this is a big question, but how do you see different personality types playing out in the book writing and publishing process? And maybe even especially as it relates to, you know, one of the first touch points when people sign up for self-publishing school and work with us is like they gather ideas, and one of the first checkpoints is what we would call a clarity call. So it's getting clear on your ideas, it's getting clear on your avatar, making sure that you're nailing this from a book perspective, from a writing perspective, and from a marketing perspective. So like, how do you see the differences play out broadly and then specifically to that first call with students?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, at a high level overview, every single person is wired differently. So they're going to experience this journey in a different way. And so that's what I love about the way that we're structured here at Self-Publishing School is we have the framework with the online course, but you also have a one-on-one coach who's there to really fine tune and help you strategize to find what's working for you. So whether or not they're well-versed in Myers-Briggs or personality, they're constantly listening of what's working and what's not to help you get a better experience, to help you get across the finish line in a way that's real for you, because everyone approaches it differently, right? So that is one of the things I love about the way that you have things structured here, Chandler, right? Is that coaching so that people have that experience to figure out what works for them, right? Every type is going to have different pitfalls and different strengths in this journey. And that's where I think tools like the Myers-Briggs can be so valuable, not only when you're writing a book, but just in life in general, right? When you increase that level of awareness, you can start to see the patterns in your life of, oh, that's why I do that, right? It's the way I'm wired. Good. There's nothing right or wrong about it. It's just the way you are. But when we know it, it's no longer just this unconscious force that's guiding us. It's something that we can be very intentional about and leverage as a strength in the way that we're operating. So when we're looking at writing a book, for example, right? I know one of the things that we like to train a lot of people up on is that process of coming up with your idea, the mind map, the outline, how to create just kind of this big picture structure, right? And again, different types are going to come at this very differently, right? Some people thrive in the mind map, right? World of possibilities, so many ideas. Let me draw all over and get lines all over the place, right? Well, what preference does that sound like? Pop quiz, Chandler.
That is perceiving.
Perceiving, and I would also
Oh, and
argue even
intuition. Yeah, intuition.
intuition.
Yeah.
Yes, right? Like a lot of times when I hear someone coming in thriving with that, right? If they kind of like the messiness of it, it's probably the perceiver, right? And again, this is a generalization. There's a lot of variables, right? But just to play with the model, right? And then same thing, the ideas, the concepts, the relationships, the patterns, right? It's very intuition, right? Well, the next step of the process is the outline. Whew. Now we get to create some structure, right? Some organization, right? It's much more linear. It's much more concrete, right? What preferences do you hear there?
Judging and probably also sensing.
Yeah, yeah. The linear side of things, right? I would argue is likely an indication of a sensory preference, right? The love for the plan, right? And having it be concrete. Again, I would argue that's judging, right? So I know I'm putting pressure on you, giving you some quizzes as we go throughout here, right? But it's cool just to kind of see how these different preferences can play out and manifest themselves in a journey like writing a book or completing a new project.
Hey, Chandler Bolt here. I hope you're loving this episode so far. It's time to go from inspiration to implementation. All right, so if you've learned something, we want to help you implement what you've learned with your book. So what I want you to do right now is go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a publishing consultation with one of the experts on my team. We'll talk about your goals for your book, your dreams, your challenges, your next steps, and we'll start putting together a plan. All right, so go to selfpublishing.com/schedule, book a call with the team. Let's see how we can help with your book. It's time to implement. And so let's keep running with that. So obviously the clarity call is largely focused on the writing for most people. So what are other ways that you see personality differences kind of come out in the writing process? So we could go linear, E versus I, or N and S, T and F, J and P. Like, what are the ways that you see that play out? How do you pick up on that? And then I know I don't want to red herring this interview, but I know you're also a big fan of strength finders. I am too. And so it's kind of this concept of like, and I don't want to introduce all that here, but like the concept of doubling down on your strengths. So I would imagine your approach is, how do I recognize the patterns for this person and then help them lean into those strengths? So what are the differences as you see them specific to writing? And then how do you help folks kind of lean into those differences, strengths, preferences, whatever you want to call them?
Yeah, for sure. So again, just for those listening, right? You can sometimes start to passively profile people by the language they use. So did you hear how Chandler just said, hey, let's go through this linearly, right? Like, again, that's SJ that I'm hearing in him, right? It's like, okay, let's take a very concrete approach, right? Let's look at this in a very structured way. I hear SJ there, right? And again, it doesn't mean that's for sure someone's type if that's the way that they see the world, but it's a concrete example of how that manifests. right? For me, I might not have gone linear. I might have just started thinking, oh yeah, here's an idea, here's another, right? And we have very different types, right? So again, it's just a different worldview. So let's take it linearly, right? So it's very clear. When we're looking at the first preference of energy, right? We have extroversion and introversion. Well, a lot of times when people think of the writing process, they envision themselves kind of sitting in the corner, sitting in the cave, just writing out this book for months, right? Without engaging anyone, right? And again, that's where it's so important to have awareness of your natural preferences, right? An introvert is going to gain energy through that alone time of processing their ideas, of pushing through it, right? Whereas Chandler, I know your strategy for writing is very different. You have a tendency to speak when you write. Is that right?
Yeah. And so maybe it's, the extrovert, and I think this is what you're getting to, is like the extrovert will probably gain energy from speaking to others about their ideas. From maybe, I know a lot of in the business world, if speakers, you've already spoken the book, you just didn't know it yet. And that is and that's kind of, we go write versus speak. And I've actually never thought about this, but I guess in a lot of ways it's not clear cut like extrovert versus introvert, but there's probably a high correlation to, oh, I would prefer to speak this, and we can transition that into a book, or I would prefer to write this.
Exactly. Yes. Right. Extroverts have a tendency to like to verbally process, right? Again, any type, any preference could engage in that as a tactic as you're writing your book, but it's going to show up differently, right? So Chandler, I talk about you on my calls, sorry, but one of the examples I give is when you speak your book, my hypothesis is that you could probably go for a pretty long period of time, right? Where you could just press play and start getting the ideas out of your mind. You might speak for 15, 20, 30 minutes straight and just let the ideas roll, right? Whereas me, I do the same thing. I speak my book, right? I do it for a different reason. It helps prevent me from overthinking. When I stare at the screen, I'll wordsmith, I'll edit, I'll go back and revise. But to be more effective for me as a speaker, as I'm working on my book and my content, I do it in smaller chunks. I'll record my manuscript for maybe 5 minutes. I'll have a bullet point and I'll just speak on that for 2 minutes, 5 minutes, whatever it is, hit pause, collect my thoughts, think through what do I want to say next? What do I want to say next, right? And then click play again and speak on the next bullet point. Again, same strategy, but that level of awareness has allowed me to find how I can refine it to meet my needs. So again, anyone can use any of these tools we're talking about, but that level of awareness can help you optimize it even more, right? Another technique that I often give for those with a preference of extroversion on coaching calls, right, is a lot of times they'll be like, I'm just so bored. Like, I don't have anyone to talk to. I'm just sitting there staring at the computer screen. I'm like, call someone, do a live training, do a webinar, call a friend, and record yourself actually talking about the content organically. Have them ask you questions, whatever it is. Maybe you give them an outline with questions on it and you conduct it like an interview, right? Play to your strengths, right? Don't overthink this process and find a way to just utilize the natural way that your brain is wired.
That's great. And I know we're kind of in the home stretch here, probably go for about 15 more minutes or so. Any other thoughts specific to writing and how you see that out or how you see that play out based on different preferences, personality types, et cetera, kind of before we move into the marketing portion?
Yeah. Another big one here is J&P. We already touched on that a little bit, right? But having a very methodical approach to sometimes letting things be a little bit more organic. Again, for both preference types, I highly encourage setting a concrete deadline for your book and have some form of accountability, whether it's an accountability partner or securing a deadline with someone else, whatever, right? But again, that deadline is going to be met in very different ways, right? The J's, again, you'll have to watch that video about the 20 mile march, right? Of that very methodical approach that is going to be the natural preference for a J to a T, right? Whereas the perceivers might need a little bit more flexibility. Sometimes I'll say, hey, let's have a trend line, but maybe we'll kind of ease our way into it, right? Maybe your goal for the first week is 1,000 words. And then the next week we're going to have 2,000. And you might see that the energy starts to increase as the deadline approaches. So let's play to that as a strength. Great. Nothing wrong with that. It doesn't have to be the same number every week if that's not the way that you're wired. But again, it's the same idea, just modifying a little bit to play to the way that your brain is naturally wired. Another pair that I think too that often plays out here is sensing and intuition. I think we have a tendency to speak from our own preference, right? So in your book, Published, Chandler, right, you do a beautiful job of taking a very step-by-step approach to the process of writing a book, which I think is crucial for so many people because it feels so intimidating, right? And you give them the blueprint, you give them the proven path. It's beautiful, right? The writers and authors that I work with that have a preference of intuition don't always communicate that way in their manuscript, right? They might be more likely to take more of a modular approach where it's looking at different themes and concepts and their interrelationship between these patterns and connections, right? This is where it's crucial to know the goal of your book and who you're speaking to, right? And finding ways to be able to adapt your communication style to those in your audience. Some people need the step-by-step linear approach. Others want to explore the ideas and the concepts and possibilities. So again, either be clear with what you're trying to say and who you're saying it to and just own the style, or find a beautiful way to blend it to make sure that we're meeting the needs of all people that might be reading your book out there in the world.
That's so great. And I think it's very important. And because I would say with the ways that I teach, webinars are obviously a huge part of that, podcast interviews like this, my books, et cetera. I think it's important to know your strengths and then also know where you might need to expand your point of view. Because I know for me, it's like I'm very S and J, right? I'm very linear. I'm very step-by-step. I'm very how-to. I'm very thinking oriented and all those things. So I know that often the counterpoint of that and what I have to be super intentional about is like, I need to talk more big ideas. I need to leave space for big ideas. I need to use stories that illustrate big ideas. I need to introduce feelings and how that might play throughout the process. And so it's how do you be conscious of the other part or the other side of the preference, and make sure that because you're going to have people that read your book, you're going to have people that attend your webinar or whatever the content delivery mechanism is that you're using. So you need to be mindful of both sides. And I love what you said there. This is going back a little bit, but the importance of accountability and a deadline, no matter which personality type, and how that's super helpful. So we're in the home stretch. I want to briefly touch on marketing, and then I want to touch on kind of, things that you see, patterns in successful students and patterns in students that don't have as much success. But first, marketing, we'll spend a couple minutes there. How do you see personality types play out in the marketing process, and how do they approach the process differently?
Yeah, the M word, huh? So often with the hundreds of students that I've coached, I feel like this is where people are often most hesitant or scared to step into. And sometimes that can cause us to respond and react in a way that's not natural to who we are. And so when we're doing something that's new, or we're stepping into something that might feel a little uncomfortable or scary. And I'm just using marketing as an example because I hear that all the time, right? There's marketers out there, right? And so I'm not saying it's scary for everyone, right? And I'm not trying to say it is a scary thing, right? But that concept of approaching something new or uncertain is all the more reason why you need to know your personality and the way that your brain is wired so you can continue to lean into it from your place of strength, right? So often, people will hit the marketing part of the course and they'll want to hop on a coaching call and they're like, I didn't even click on it because I wasn't sure if I was supposed to. I didn't know what to do. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this. I don't want to put myself out there. A phrase that I hear all the time, and again, I'm a Myers-Briggs nerd, so I geek out on this kind of stuff, but they're like, I'm not an extrovert, so I can't put myself out there. Well, so what, right? Do it through writing if you're an introvert. Right? So much of online marketing is writing really effective ad copy and finding a way to write information that's engaging. Well, that's a strength of an introvert. So play to your strength, right? Sure, maybe if you don't want to put yourself out there, maybe you're not going to be the person hopping on live video feeds and doing webinars and doing these free trainings and all these things where you are the brand and putting yourself out there, right? But if that's your strength, do it. Right? So again, that level of awareness when we're doing something new, right? And marketing as a concrete example, because so many people that we work with, they're writing their very first book. They've never done book marketing. Even if they've done marketing in other ways, they're like, I don't know how to get a book out there in the world. Well, guess what? We have a proven path. So trust it, right? But adapt it following the way that your brain is wired so we can get the most out of it.
That's amazing. And I love that you keyed in on the introverts, extroverts, and kind of people thinking, because I just feel like because, yeah, I mean, this is probably a bold statement, but because extroverts dominate so much of conversations, introverts, there's all these limiting beliefs of like, I can't lead as an introvert. I can't market as an introvert. I can't blank, blank, blank that involves people because I'm an introvert, and using it almost as a crutch or as a limiting belief. And I never thought about this, but almost our whole marketing team is introverts. And they are a big part of the reason why we're successful at SPS. And we've always been really, really, really good at marketing. And a lot of those skill sets require introversion. But looking at data, analyzing trends, crystallizing messaging, like all those things, if you're just always out in the market talking to people, which is, yes, is definitely helpful. But if you're always doing that and you never stop to think, or you never stop to process and internalize the data, you're not going to be doing a very good job from a marketing perspective. So love that. We could talk all day on marketing. And by the way, I'll just quickly touch on this, and maybe we'll mention it again at the end. But this is like the 101 from a Myers-Briggs perspective. I've seen Gary do so many more advanced trainings, and there's so many ways that we could go through this. If you are enjoying this interview, you want to see more of this, let us know. There's two ways you can do this. The easiest way is to leave a review on the podcast and mention this episode. And specifically what you thought and what you'd love to see more of. That is far and away the easiest way to do this. We might come back and do a 201 for Myers-Briggs. We might come back and do specific to different personality types. That is only if you guys love this. So we're going to listen to you, and we're going to do more of what you want to see more of. So let us know via review or reach out via email. You can respond to any of the emails that come from us at SPS, and just make sure that you let us know to get this in front of myself and Gary so that we can see that. So home stretch here, I want to just take a couple minutes to take a look at, okay, personality types aside, you've coached hundreds of students, thousands of coaching calls. What are the commonalities that you see in our most successful students? So if I'm listening to this or watching this and I am an SPS student or thinking about it, or maybe I'm not, and that's totally fine too. And I just want to know, like, what are the traits that I need to have to be successful? What have you seen kind of the commonalities of your most successful students?
Yeah. So the first thing about my head is not a trait. I'll get to traits in a second, right? But the first thing, and I think one of the things that's so powerful, is having a concrete deadline. I cannot tell you the number of coaching conversations I've been on where someone hops on and they're like, yeah, I don't know what book I want to write. Great. What are your ideas? They pull open this drawer, right, of the manuscripts they've been collecting for 20 years. They've done all of this writing, right? But they've never given themselves a deadline to put it out there. And a book is something that can easily not feel urgent. And it's something that you can easily set aside, but it can open up so many doors, whether you're trying to speak, whether you're trying to grow your business, whether you're trying to create a better impact in the world, whatever it is, right? It can open so many doors. And so treat it as such. Treat it as a concrete project, as something that you want to actually get out there into the world, and give yourself a deadline for it. Otherwise, it can easily turn into a someday project, right? So this is advice for every personality type, no matter how you're wired. Yes, even you Ps out there, the perceiving types, the deadline is so important. And again, we can have some flexibility, but it's going to drive that level of urgency to get you across the finish line and make meaningful progress, because otherwise the fear, right? The uncertainty can sometimes creep in and get us completely off track. Right? So have a deadline, stick to it, have that accountability. It's so important, right? Now, beyond that, we want to be able to tailor, right, the experience for you. And so the biggest thing that I would say in relationship to this conversation that helps people be successful is to be critically reflective on what is working for them, right? Great, do more of it. Right? So sometimes I'll have people hop on a coaching call and they're like, yeah, Chandler, I heard him talking about writing every morning, and I get up and I just stare at the screen, but at night my brain comes alive. Well, great. Just because Chandler writes in the morning doesn't mean everyone in the world has to, right? But again, if for Chandler writing in the morning works, do more of it. If writing in the evening works, do more of it. And so taking that step back and being critically reflective and figuring out that answer to the question, what is working, and celebrating that and doing more of it, it's just going to catapult you into this place of productivity and success with your book.
That's amazing. And I love that you keyed in on that, because there's kind of two things that we say to all students, and especially our accelerator students or Author Advantage accelerator students, is how can I make this more simple, or how can you keep things simple, and how can you do more of what's working, which is exactly what you're just saying. Keep it simple, do more of what's working. And what I didn't hear you say, but I have heard you say, and a lot of the other coaches say, is use the materials that you have, use the course. And a lot of people rely on the heavy lifting of the coaching calls, which are amazing. But the coaching calls are meant to build on what you're already doing by using the curriculum. And so make sure that you're utilizing the resources that you have. And that's what I've seen is like the best students utilize the resources and then come to the coaching calls to contextualize what they're already working on. So that's super important. All right. We're running up against the line here. I think last couple questions. What type of students are the most difficult to work with? And shoot us straight here, Gary. Like what are the commonalities that you see in either students that don't hit their goals or don't see as much success as they'd like through the program?
Good question. That's a challenging one, because my brain automatically goes to another system where we talk about maximizer. And my brain is constantly looking for the strengths of people and how to optimize that. Yeah. I think the hardest students are the ones that come in with a demeanor where it's like this lack of coachability, right? Where the ability to be open, right? And be reflective and have open dialogue and conversations is just so powerful. And so when students are coming into a conversation where it's like, yep, I've already got it all figured out. It's like, okay, then why are we even here? Right? You don't need me, right? Just go do your thing then. Great. Fantastic. Right. But again, those are sometimes the students that I see don't make it across the finish line, right?
Yeah.
Like you've got to be able to have that level of awareness to be able to step into that dialogue.
100%. And oftentimes the people who think they don't need coaching are the people who need it the most. And so I would just encourage you, if you work with SPS, if you don't, this is just a life philosophy, is if you're seeking out information from someone, or say if I have a lead or a boss, or if I'm coming to self-publishing school, or if I'm Googling or whatever, if I approach it with a beginner's mind, or if I approach it, say, I'm assuming that this person I can learn. It's like the proverb that each person is superior to me in some way, and in that I learn of them. So it's like, it's my job as a human being to find the areas that other people are talented and learn from them in those areas. And especially if you're paying us money at SPS, like this is a huge part of what you're paying us for. So listen, as my manager and mentor back in the day, he had a motto, it was listen and do it. It's like, it was the student painters, and he said, hey, I'm going to show you a proven process. It's your job to listen and do it, and then come back with questions. I think that's super important.
And I think that goes back to even what you were just saying there real quick, right? Of using your resources, right? When students are going in and using the online course, well, guess what? We have so much more space in coaching calls to strategize, to talk about stuff like this, of what's working and what's not. Otherwise, I have to repeat to you a bunch of recorded content that you could get on your own, right? Yeah. And that's important. We need that. So use the foundational information that's out there as the proven path, but then now we have the space on coaching calls to dig in deeper and personalize it to you, right? So I think it ties into both those questions there.
That's amazing. Hey, final question or two here. Obviously, Author Advantage Live coming up. Author Advantage Live this year, the Author Advantage Live virtual experience. We do this event every year. It's an amazing event if you're writing and publishing books and using those books to grow your impact, your income, and your business. Depending on when you're listening to this or watching this, this year may have already passed, or it may not have. But let's talk specific to Author Advantage Live virtual experience 2020. Why should people come, and what are you going to be teaching about there?
Yeah. Why should you come? You'd be ridiculous not to, right? There is so much valuable content packed into just a couple days that can help you no matter where you're at in the journey, right? If you're writing your first book or your 30th book, you're going to have time and space to learn, but also execute and implement and take action on the things that you're learning to grow your author business, to grow your book platform, right? To grow as a human being. There's so many valuable resources that you're going to have access to. And it's a great way to get connected to the community. At the event, I'm excited. We're going to be talking about how to really get in tune with your target audience. One of the strengths that I have as a coach is on that very first call of Clarity Calls. I help people really dig in deep to their book from the perspective of their reader, right? So often as authors, we view ourselves as subject matter experts, but if we just speak from what we know and spew information, we're going to miss the mark. You've got to know where your reader's at, what are they thinking, feeling, experiencing, and meet their needs. And so that's exactly what we're going to do at Author Advantage Live in my session.
Heck yeah, it's going to be awesome. Don't miss it. Grab your ticket if you haven't already, authoradvantagelive.com, authoradvantagelive.com. Seriously, grab a ticket today. Don't wait. What are you waiting for? Be there. It's going to be amazing. You can find full details, pricing, all that stuff on the website. Again, that's authoradvantagelive.com. Yeah, Gary, final question. This has been amazing. Where can people find out more about you and where can they buy your book?
Yeah. So where can you find out more about me? Self-publishing school. Opportunity to jump in and perhaps be coached by me or hop on group coaching calls. And so I always love supporting authors there. My book is available on Amazon. Again, it's called Choose Your Best Life. It's really an introductory view to Myers-Briggs in an applied fashion. So I'd invite you to check it out, grab a copy if you're interested in this sort of thing and start seeing how you can apply it. Again, it's kind of this introductory level of a conversation, but super valuable.
That's amazing. Hey, Gary, thank you so much. And guys, if you want to hear more about this, so if you want me to bring Gary back for like a 201 Myers-Briggs training or specific to personality types or anything like that, please let us know. So leave a review on the podcast, specifically mentioning this interview and what you'd like to see more of, or reach out with an email. I'm not going to do it if we don't hear from you and if you don't want it. So I'm personally curious, but I want to make sure that it's something you guys are interested in. So please let me know. And Gary, thanks again.
Absolutely. Great being here.
Thank you so much for watching or listening to this episode of the Self-Publishing School podcast. I know there's so many places that you can be spending your time. There's other podcasts that you could be listening to, YouTube channels that you could be watching. So thank you so much. It means the world. Now, I want you to do 3 things right now if you found this episode helpful. All right, number 1, I don't know if you know this, but we've got a YouTube channel. It's a companion channel to this podcast. All the video versions of the episode are on the YouTube channel. So number 1, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Number 2, if you're listening to this podcast wherever, whether this is Spotify, Apple Podcasts, number 2, I want you to subscribe to this podcast right now so you don't miss a future episode. And then number 3, this is probably the most important, leave a review on the podcast. All right, reviews are super important and help this podcast get discovered by other people. So number 3, leave a review on the podcast. Thank you so much. I'll see you in the next episode. If you're on the fence about scheduling a publishing consultation call with my team, maybe you're not quite ready for that, I've got some free training that I think will be really helpful for you. All right, all you have to do is go to register to sign up. Go to selfpublishing.com/free training. When you do, you're also going to get a free digital copy of my new book, Published. And on that training, you're going to learn the next steps, so how to implement with your book. So how to write, how to publish, how to launch successfully. So go to register right now at selfpublishing.com/free training. I'll see you there.